Well, it's about that time. It is about that time for the start of the 2024 Dallas Cowboys football season here on StarTelegram.com for another episode of Cowboys Overtime. I am Fort Worth Star Telegram columnist Mac Engel. Really want to thank our good friend, the esteemed, venerable Dean.
Now, old.
Experienced, wise, savvy, and always good looking, Mr. Mike Ducey of Fox 4 KDFW, for joining us on this episode as I continue to find different people to join me here on StarTelegram.com's version of Cowboys Overtime, sponsored by Window Nation, without Clarence E. Hill Jr. Clarence E. Hill Jr., the longtime Fort Worth Star Telegram Dallas Cowboys savant, left us to go to Trader, Turncoat, different organization he's with now. So without Clarence, until we find our full-time replacement, I've asked friends of mine in the market to join us here on Cowboys Overtime. And I'm joined by none other than the great Mike Ducey. Mike, thank you very much for joining us. You look fantastic. How has your summer been? I know your kids you are officially an empty nester, an empty nester. How has that transition been for you?
You know, Mac, good to be with you. First of all, you've done Free for All many times for us. There's the Free for All logo.
I like that.
I do kind of dig the lighting in here. It's not bad. Makes my hair look darker than it really is. The bags are kind of showing there. It's funny you would ask about the empty nester thing today, because it's an exciting time in our family. We're going to become grandparents for the first time later this month. Our older daughter Christina, is having a little boy. So that's very exciting times. And just today, we took our younger daughter, Laura, to the airport. She's moving to New York City. So big changes for her. I'm warning you, Mac, don't believe anybody who tells you that those situations get easier the older they get or the older you get, because they don't. I was kind of a wreck, and still am a little bit as we talk about it now. But she's safely landed in New York now, and is getting settled in her apartment there. So that's how it is, I guess, as an empty nester for us right now. Just still fortunate to spend a lot of time with our kids, and soon to be a grandbaby too. So it's great.
Congratulations. That's very exciting. You know, when I remember when our daughter was in the second grade, and her second grade teacher, a wonderful woman, told us, look, you are working to get yourself out of a job. The whole idea is you raise your child so they can be on their own, and your daughter's moving to New York. Obviously, your kids have done very well, which is very exciting for you and your spouse. But do you feel that way, Mike? Like, hey, we did it, you know? Or is it more like, oh no, they're leaving?
I think there's a little bit of both there. There's pride, and you feel that obviously as a parent now. But there's a little wistfulness that goes on. It hits me from time to time. I forget what we were down in Galveston over the weekend and driving back, and Laura was in the car with us, and some song came on that just hit me right between the eyes that she and I listened
Turn
to
it off
when she was first 10 years old, you know. And I'm like, she was driving. She's like, Dad, why are you looking out the window? And I'm trying to just get it back together. You know? So just a mess.
It's windy. It's really windy.
Exactly.
Allergies.
So, there's a mix of emotions, but we're so lucky to be able to experience all of them.
Halloween's coming up, obviously, next month, and our daughter, who's 15, was talking about what she was going to do for Halloween. And she said, you know, I'm really sorry. I really enjoyed trick-or-treating with you guys, because we did. We did that a lot. And Halloween is very much, that's a very special holiday for me and with her, because we would always dress up. Like one year I went as Frankenstein and she went as the Bride of Frankenstein. But she's 15 now, and she's doing things that she should do with, you know, her friends. But she was very sorry about that. And I keep telling myself, and maybe you've done this too, I'm so glad that I did those things, that I had those memories, that I have those experiences, even though they're gone, even though she's moved on to hanging out with friends, and she's, you know, trick-or-treating is not cool anymore, even though I'm encouraging her to do it. You know, do 10 houses. That's all you need to do. because when it's done for a long, long time. It's done until you have kids. And I've encouraged you to do that, but it's really hard some days. I know what you mean, because when those moments are gone, they're gone.
Yeah, that's well put. No, it's true. And again, funny you'd mentioned Halloween because, and to a certain extent, you work at night as well, covering events through the years. But I work, every night, 5 nights a week. That just happens to be when my job takes place. But I would almost always make an exception on Halloween. Would always take that night off so I could take the girls out trick or treating. So it's funny that you come up with that as a way to make some memories. And I would always dress up as the slightly overweight dad with the red Solo cup. That was always my
was your
outfit. Yeah, that was always, the moms in the neighborhood loved it. What can I say? Yeah.
Well, I think they liked a lot. I think they just like the guy I think they just like the Fox 4 guy.
Probably,
I think you could have dressed up as anything like, oh my God, that's Mike Ducey.
And I always wore the Fox 4 blazer, of course, as well.
Let's get some free advertising.
Right.
All right. Dallas Cowboys start their regular season on Sunday at Cleveland. I will be there, otherwise known as the Mistake by the Lake. Now, I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it gives me the right to make fun of Cleveland mercilessly. They've gone 12-5, 3 straight years. This is Mike McCarthy's last year of his 5-year contract. I don't think anybody could say he's done anything other than advance the ball from where Jason Garrett left it, as disappointing as some of these playoffs might have been and are. This was not the world's most exciting offseason, Mike, but the Cowboys have been a pretty good team for the last 3 years. Are you optimistic about this 2024 season?
First of all, before I forget, Sam Gannon, my co-host, will be in Cleveland covering the game as well.
Oh,
so
good.
You'll see Sam out there, and it is a Fox game, Tom Brady's debut and all that
on
Fox 4. So that's kind of cool for our network. I'm not necessarily overly optimistic, but I don't think I'm as pessimistic as a lot of people are. And I try to be realistic about it. Obviously, I don't have any skin in the game other than hoping that they're interesting one way or another, which they almost always are. And it's funny, you mentioned McCarthy, and you talk about a guy who I think is hurt in terms of public perception by the way he presents himself, and that
why do you say that?
He's not a self-promoter. I don't think he is anyway.
No,
I think he, I don't know. He's the same coach as why am I blanking out on the Broncos coach? He's the same coach as Sean Payton. The record is almost exactly the same.
All of it, postseason.
Yet if you ask anybody, certainly in our business, Peyton, this guy's a genius. I'm not saying he's not, but he's a genius because he tells us, maybe not in so many words, that he's a genius.
Yep.
And McCarthy tends not to do that. Anyway, to answer your question, not necessarily optimistic, but not really pessimistic either. I realize their roster is not as deep as it was last year. I realize there are huge question marks in terms of rookies on the offensive line. And oh, by the way, who's going to run the ball? Things like that. The secondary now with Bland out as well, and depending largely on a rookie corner to take his place. I know what the question marks are, but I also know that I think they have a top 5 quarterback in the league, and maybe I'm in the minority in believing that, in Dak Prescott coming off his best year. And even though I think their schedule, and it's always dangerous, Mac, as you noted, to evaluate an NFL schedule before the season, because you don't know how these teams are going to be.
Yeah.
On paper, it's tougher than it was last year. But the division doesn't really scare me if I'm the Cowboys. So I think they could I could envision them winning this division again, even though, winning 12 games for a 4 straight year would be very difficult to do. But I think it's a 10 or 11 win team. I really believe that.
Mike, the thing that's amazing to me about the Cowboys is that, since you mentioned relevant, the one thing they have consistently done since Bill Parcells' 3rd season, so that's 2005, that was his 3rd season. And that team went into week 17 or week 16, the final game of the regular season, and they needed a lot of things to break right. But it was a relevant game until kickoff, because then they were officially knocked out of the playoffs. But every time since then, they've consistently relevant football all the way throughout the regular season, with limited exception. They've had those seasons where Tony Romo got hurt or Dak Prescott got hurt, but for the most part, they've been relevant in every game of the regular season, which not every team can say. And I realize that bar is not the standard that set the Cowboys brand what it is. They set the standard at Super Bowls and playoffs. So, okay, there's that. Then you would think at times since Wade Phillips' first season, and maybe even Bill's last season, there have been stretches, Mike, where you would say that's the best team in the NFL. They did it under Jason Garrett. They did it under Wade for a little bit. They certainly did it for a time or two under McCarthy. They've never done it in January. Wouldn't you think, law of averages, Mike, forget the Super Bowl, wouldn't you think law of averages would say for a team that's done those things and been kind of around it, they would fall backwards into a divisional round win to get to a conference championship game once?
No, you're absolutely right. And that's why, and I love to bash Jerry as much as the next guy does. But that's why it's ultimately hard to really blame Jerry for a lot of this, right? Because he's put the pieces in place to, as you say, keep them relevant. And everybody harps on how, the reason he does that is, to make money and on and on and on. And yeah, that's been the most beneficial result for the franchise. But
Sure.
Yeah, if he's put the pieces in place, or Will McClay has, or Steven has, to get them through the regular season with so much success and put them in position to succeed in the playoffs, it is a horrible run of luck to a certain extent, of bad luck to just not be able to deliver in the postseason. And the playoff game that ended their season last year is a perfect example of that.
Awful.
Now people are crowning, look how rich Jordan Love got largely off of that game, and how people are crowning the Packers as the next best thing in the NFC based on that, largely on that one playoff game. But Dak was horrible in that game. The defense was horrible in that game. Yep. Just on and on and on and on. So you're right. It's baffling in a way, and I don't buy necessarily into the fact that it's just a culture that keeps this team failing in the postseason, because it just doesn't make any sense why you would have so much success for so long over a number of months and then just totally forget how to play the game.
Last topic before we go to break. Obviously, the big off the field issue for the Cowboys is the contract for the quarterback. And Dak Prescott does not need, but certainly has been talking to the Cowboys about a contract extension. The Cowboys will wait to the 11th hour and 59th minute to do extensions. Usually. They did it with CeeDee Lamb. They have a history of it because they're not going to do it unless they have to do it. They have waited this long. Now, Mike, if you're Dak Prescott, week one is days away. Do you sign that extension if it's on the table and it's going to be a massive number? At this point, if you're Dak and his representation, do you say, take that number, let's do it, and just have it done? Or, Mike, do you say, you know what? We've come this far. You bet on yourself once. If you wait and hit the free agent market next year, you're going to get a monster number. Which one would you do?
I'd sign it just because of the number being as huge as it's going to be with the Cowboys, albeit probably not as big as what he would get somewhere else. But I think Dak Prescott understands what it means to be quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, the good and the bad, but in Dak's mind, mostly the good. And in so many ways, he's the perfect fit for that position with this franchise. Hasn't gotten it done in the postseason, fully aware of that. But if I'm Dak, I sign it. And I'm of a mind to think that they will get it done, maybe even before the regular season begins.
I think you're right. Is there any part of you that thinks there might be somebody with the Cowboys, whether it's Steven, whether it's Will McClay, who says, you know what, we're going to have to eat a lot if he leaves. And this is going to be, but maybe we should just let this ride. And what Jerry really meant by all in was, and I had a front office person tell me this, it wasn't about signing free agents. It's about, this is it. We're all in on this. This is what everybody's got on these 1-year deals, basically. And then we're just going to start from square one if this thing doesn't go the way we want in January. Do you think, Mike, there's any part of the Cowboys that believes that and says, we'll just start from square one and Dak, good luck and God bless, and we're going to move in a different direction?
It is my sense that it would be Jerry who feels that way. Just
Do you really?
you look back at that opening presser at training camp, and I think he loves Dak. I think he understands how much Dak has meant to this organization, but some of that frustration that comes from that playoff performance last year might manifest itself in the attitude that Jerry is taking now. But again, with that said, it's not unusual for them to wait like this. It's not unusual for Jerry to enjoy the suspense that is created by not getting the deal done.
Yeah.
And then, who knows, maybe taking a little bit of the shine away from the Thursday night opener, of the NFL by making it happen on that day. Who knows?
All right, we've got more to talk about here on Cowboys Overtime. But first, let's hear from our good friends, great friends, amazing friends, loyal friends, Window Nation.
Window Nation, the star of window replacement and proud partner of the Dallas Cowboys, can help you fill the house this season with savings. Buy 2 windows, get 2 free, and make no interest payments for 60 months, 5 full years. Fill your house for a customized authentic Dallas Cowboys jersey while supplies last. You could even help fill the Cowboys house and win tickets to a game. Visit windownation.com/Cowboys now for details. Call 866-95-NATION. Window Nation, proud partner of the Dallas Cowboys.
Thank you very much, Window Nation. Back here on StarTelegram.com for Cowboys Overtime. I'm Star Telegram columnist Mac Engel. He's Mr. Mike Ducey of Fox 4 fame and arguably the finest head of hair ever.
Oh, I used to have it, Mac. Used to have it.
Hey, I totally get it.
It was unparalleled.
It was a good run, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The biggest, you mentioned there at the top, we know what this team's questions are about the Cowboys. And to me, and obviously secondary, maybe the interior of the defensive line, although they shorted up with some old guys, linebacker, you're not really sure about what some of those guys are going to do. But to me, the one that just screams at me is the running back position. And we have talked about this, and we've seen teams and their attitude change towards running backs over the years as the position has been increasingly devalued. But this one takes the cake. Mike, who is this team's running back number 1 on Sunday in Cleveland?
Well, I think Zeke will get the most carries, but I think I think Dowdle will have the most yards. I might be the only guy in town who's kind of excited to see what Rico Dowdle can do.
I am.
Oh, those words, okay, because I think he's shown a little something. Reasons. There's a little bit of a dynamic style to him, I think, maybe some game-breaking ability, but I don't know. It's a hard question to answer. They certainly would not have. I'm going to say they wouldn't have drawn up the running back room this way, but in reality, they did because they let Tony Pollard get away. That said, I think you could still be a really effective offense doing the running back by committee thing. It's just a matter of whether the guys on your committee are even decent enough, productive enough collectively to create a threat for your offense, and that really does remain to be seen. It's a big time concern coming into this season. Did
the addition of Dalvin Cook, veteran from the Jets, really more with the Vikings, but does that do anything for you at all?
It kind of does. It does. And I know how bad he was last year. I know he was dealing with some injuries. You can't tell me that he might not have a little something left after having all those 1,000-yard years back to back to back to back. I guess he and Zeke, somewhat the same story in that regard. It's just my sense that maybe Cook doesn't have quite the wear and tear on him that Ezekiel Elliott does, although they're very similar in that way. So I could see a time where they rely on Cook a little bit as well. But again, I think there's a possibility that Rico Dowdle ends up being, if not the featured back, a guy who can be consistently counted on to be pretty productive for them.
Well, my hope was every now and then, every season, and fantasy football people will attest to it, every season there's some player or players who just fall from the sky and produce numbers. And they weren't, maybe they were a 5th round pick, maybe they were a 7th round pick. Usually they're not unrestricted free agent types, but if they're behind a line that can block a little bit and they got a passing attack that can create some space, we've seen guys do okay. And maybe they'll crank out 1,000 yards, maybe even 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. This team's running game was so bad last season inside the red zone, and specifically the 10. I get why I don't like it. I really don't like it. I get why they went out and got Zeke.
Right.
I get that. And the reason not because Zeke's a bad guy or a bad pro, anything but. I just remember that second half of his last season with Dallas, and he just had nothing left. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what you're expecting out of this guy, but if he's your leading ball carrier in attempts, I think you've got problems. I think if you're relying on a young offensive line, and I know Zach Martin's getting a little bit older, a little bit long in the tooth, but I still trust that guy. But if you look at that line and the upgrades they made, and if Dowdle has some space, that's where all my hope is for that, because I'm not putting any faith in Deuce Vaughn. They barely looked at him. They've got the same guy with Kevontae Turpin, two very, very little guys that if they're going to be on the field, you better be getting them the ball, or they better be way on the other side of where the ball is going, because they're going to be a massive liability in blocking. So now you've occupied a roster spot, 2 roster spots on kind of one guy. And my big criticism of the Trey Lance trade wasn't the fact that the kid hasn't really demonstrated he can play. It's the fact that you gave up a 4th-round pick and now a roster spot essentially for a position that you really need in a running back, and you're just going to sit on it. And I think it's going to bite him in the rear end a little bit. But maybe you're right, and I think you've got to let it play out at least a month to see how this guy can play if he's given the ball 15 to 18 times a game. Because Tony Pollard was not the answer last year at all.
No.
He was good a little bit early, but he needed to be in a complementary role while he's gone. So now I think of all of them, what they're really doing is relying on that offensive line and the upgrades they've made to the draft. And if those guys are pretty good, then the running backs can at least be serviceable. And I think at this point, that should be the high water mark.
Yeah, the best you can hope for right now is the running back room is constituted, is that Dowdle is your lightning and Zeke is your thunder. Feel free to use that one if you'd like.
I will. I'm writing that down. Are you going to do like T-shirts and mugs for that?
Zeke can still be an effective short yardage guy.
Yes.
That's assuming you're ever within the opponent's 5-yard line or whatever, and that Dowdle can break one for you from time to time or keep defenses honest, because it's all going to come down to the way Dak plays anyway, and that wouldn't matter who the running back is. But would you ideally, if you're the Cowboys, like to have somebody who apparently is a little more reliable back there and is more in his prime, of course, but I don't know. Something tells me Zeke might have just a little bit more left than people are assuming, and that there might be a 1-year resurgence for him. I'm not saying he'll be back to the way he was when he was winning rushing titles, but we might be a little surprised by what we see from him. And I'm kind of anxious to see what Dowdle can bring to it. So that's how I view the running back thing.
You remember when the Cowboys gave up on DeMarco Murray and he left, and he squeezed out a couple more good years in Philly and then won in Tennessee. So you never, if he can stay, and DeMarco's problem had been health, and he stayed when he was healthy. He was still pretty good, and maybe I think that's what the Cowboys are counting on. All right, let's move on to our final topic. Well, before we ask, I have to get you some predictions. We're going to move on to a subject that's very near and dear to us: college football. Week 1, whatever you want to call it, last week saw most teams in the state of Texas either look really good, talking University of Texas, or embarrassingly not good. I'm talking Texas A&M, University of Houston. If you want to throw Texas Tech in that discussion, go ahead, because Texas Tech needed overtime to beat Abilene Christian. TCU really outplayed Stanford, but it was a closer game than the final score indicated. Actually, the final score was closer than the actual game was. But the big game, obviously the team that looked the best was Texas by far. They go down. They're in Austin. They blow out Colorado State. Arch Manning gets in the game, has some highlight plays. He looks good. Quinn Ewers looks great. UT is rolling, the number 3 in the nation. Now they go to the Big House to play what will probably be the most expensive non-conference game in their history. They will play Michigan on Saturday at 11 a.m. on your network. Texas is a 7.5 point favorite against the team that is the defending national champions and has only lost one time in the last 2 years, and that was to TCU in the Fiesta Bowl. Mike, I don't think this Michigan team is nearly as good as that last year's team. That last year's team was loaded. Texas is a 7.5 point favorite. For me, I think they need to go in there and kick their butt. In your mind, to really show, hey, we're as good as the hype. Do you think they need to go in and stomp Michigan?
Yeah, it's funny because Sam and I just did a segment with Joel Klatt, who will be calling that game on Fox. It's going to air on Free for All 10:30 Thursday night.
Good plug.
And Klatt's, thank you. Klatt's thought is much like yours in that, all the pressure is on Texas in this game. And just think about that statement. I'm not saying I disagree with it, but the pressure is on the road team against the defending national champions.
Good point. Yes.
But that's the thing that Sarkisian has built at UT, where anything shy of, I'm not going to say shy of a national championship, but at least a trip to the national championship game would probably be considered a disappointment. That's how this thing is setting up. You've got the quarterback, you've got the dynamic playmakers, maybe a little bit of the jury's still out on the defense, but I think you're right. Michigan's not the Michigan team that won it all last year, but it's still that stadium. It's still that environment.
Yeah.
You let Michigan hang around long enough in this game, and then things get weird, and before you know it, you're upset in a game like this. So, yeah, I think Texas needs to go out and establish dominance early in this one, put the Wolverines away to get out of Ann Arbor with a win.
All right, it's prediction time. Cowboys at Cleveland. Fox telecast, Tom Brady's regular season debut. Good job, Greg Olson, by the way. Cowboys are a 2.5 point underdog. 2.5 point underdog. So I need you for two predictions. Who's going to win the game? And give me a regular season prediction record, sir.
Yeah, I'm going to take Cleveland in this game. I think it's a tough opener for Dallas against a really good Cleveland defense and one of the game's great pass rushers against, an offensive line that's especially that rookie left tackle who's obviously unproven. I see a 24-20 type game for Cleveland in this opener. And I've got the Cowboys at 10-7 this year. I think to win 12 4 years in a row is a tall task, but I think 10-7 is probably good enough to win the division and put them back in the playoffs and give them another opportunity to prove us wrong in the postseason.
I hate to be boring. I agree with everything you said. If Deshaun Watson wasn't playing, and I'm fascinated to see how that's going to go, because he has not been the same guy since all of those allegations popped against him in Houston, and then he sat out. He got traded to Cleveland for a ridiculous contract, and he hasn't really done anything other than get hurt. But when he was right, he was really good. I don't know if he's ever going to be right again. And to me, that's the only chance the Cowboys have, is if he's a dog. And if he's bad, then I give him a shot. But I think that defense, and specifically Myles Garrett, is going to give Dallas all kinds of problems, even though, Dak Prescott's good. I think this is a bad matchup for week one. So I think you're right. I think Cleveland will handle the Cowboys and cover the spread. I've got them going 10-7 and getting to the wild card game and losing.
Okay.
I want to be consistent.
Really
but
out on a limb there,
I am hoping this time I am wrong. Mike, I kept you too long, but I really want to thank you. Congratulations to you, your wife, and your beautiful family, and on your new arrival. That's very, very exciting. Do you have a name yet? And is it going to be Mac?
I got some middle name, I think, actually.
That's good. He's Mike Ducey. Check him out on Free for All with Sam Gannon, Jeff Cobb, and all of his family and friends as well. Fox 4 telecast, kickoff, 3:30, Cowboys at Browns. Thank you for our producer, Candy Bolden. Thank you, Window Nation. And this time next week, we should have our Cowboys beat writer with us. See you next week.
See you guys.